Today's video was created for two reasons: to help you understand where your money has been spent over many decades and how it could have been used to hurt you. If you think the embezzling or money laundering that DOJ is uncovering is bad, just wait till you know it all. So for those who are appalled at the waste and type of programs that you have been paying for, stay tuned. It just could clarify a lot of questions in your life. Secondly, for those of you who have flashbacks or distant memories that you can't quite clarify, I'm going to give you specific types of people, agency affiliations, and locations where these things occurred to hopefully help jar your memory and put together missing pieces. Before we get into it, please help me out with your comments and likes, and I would be honored if you subscribed and hit the bell to become part of our amazing community. Let's continue. Many wasteful and inhumane government programs have been declassified because they are allegedly discontinued. This was prior to the current administration, but if you think for 1 second that these programs haven't surfaced in new and improved forms, you are deluding yourself. Kash Patel, John Ratcliffe, and numerous military brass are going to have to deal with these dark money programs. These are also black op military programs that even the commander-in-chief doesn't know about in many cases, but the money for them was coming out of somewhere within our government, and somebody, aka Congress, was approving this dark money. So keep this in mind as you begin to learn about the type of waste and fraud that DOJ is uncovering, and realize that there is an entire unseen portal to dark money somewhere within those computers that must be followed to get to the real bad stuff. I want to warn you that images contained within this video are disturbing. They are real and must never be forgotten. This is why they are included, but if you don't want to see what was done to us, you may want to skip some of the photos. As always, here's a little predicate so that you can learn where you might expect disclosure to be occurring and where you can research declassified documents. The FBI and CIA online vaults serve as digital repositories for declassified documents under the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. I've mentioned them before and will put the links in the description again. For the FBI vault, the electronic reading room was officially launched in its current form on April 1, 2011. On that date, the FBI announced the vault as a revamped electronic reading room, containing over 2,000 documents scanned from paper into digital copies for public access. While the FBI had released records online prior to this, the 2011 launch marked a significant update with new tools and a broader collection, building on earlier efforts to digitize and share declassified files. The CIA FOIA Electronic Reading Room. The CIA began making records available online as part of its FOIA obligations, with significant updates over time. A notable milestone came in January 2017, when the CIA announced that its entire collection of declassified documents, approximately 930,000 files totaling 12 million pages, was made available online. This followed years of digitization efforts, with some records previously accessible only on CREST, CIA record search tool, terminals at the National Archives since 2000. So it kind of gave us access, but everything is redacted and who knows what to believe about what they've really got. The online reading room evolved gradually, but the 2017 release marked a major expansion of public access and hopefully can be utilized by President Trump or DOJ to provide us full access with all of the promised declassified documents. So now let's look at one such secret United States government program named Operation Paperclip, which brought Nazi scientists, engineers, and technicians to work for the United States after World War II. The operation, led by the Office of Strategic Services and later the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, sought to recruit German experts, particularly in rocketry, aerospace, and chemical weapons. This was allegedly done to prevent them from working for the Soviet Union during the Cold War. These Nazi specialists were transferred into our government programs from 1945 to 1959, though many scientists continued working in the United States beyond that period. You might think that sparing a few experts and giving them a deal isn't so bad, but the United States transferred over 1,600 Nazi-affiliated scientists and engineers into our government and relied upon them to be ethical in the areas of rocket science, aerospace technology, chemical and biological warfare, and medical experiments. Let's look at some of the most notable Nazi scientists that were recruited by the United States government. First, Wernher von Braun was a former SS officer and lead scientist of the Nazi V-2 rocket program, the world's first ballistic missile. SS, or Schutzstaffel, was a paramilitary organization under Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in Germany during the Third Reich. His work was conducted at the Peenemünde Army Research Center and later at the Mittelwerk underground factory, where slave labor from concentration camps, notably Mittelbau-Dora, was used under brutal conditions. Von Braun later became a key figure in NASA, helping develop the Saturn V rocket that sent Apollo astronauts to the moon. The next Operation Paperclip transplant was Hubertus Strughold, a German physiologist and medical researcher who played a significant role in aviation medicine during the Nazi era. His work focused on understanding the physiological effects of high-altitude flight and extreme conditions on pilots. This included studies on oxygen deprivation, pressure changes, and hypothermia, aimed at improving pilot survival rates. There was one little problem. His high-altitude experiments involved low-pressure chambers. The experiments were conducted at Dachau concentration camp by SS physician Sigmund Rascher. Prisoners were placed in low-pressure chambers to simulate conditions faced by pilots bailing out at high altitudes, up to 68,000 feet. Many subjects died as their lungs ruptured, or they suffered oxygen deprivation. Also at Dachau, freezing or hypothermia. Experiments aimed to study hypothermia's effects and rewarming techniques for downed pilots in cold seas. Prisoners were submerged in icy water or left naked in freezing conditions for hours, often resulting in death. Rewarming methods, including immersion in scalding water, were tested, sometimes fatally. But Strughold's expertise didn't stop there. Oxygen deprivation experiments were conducted on 6 epileptic children aged 11 to 13. This was done as the Brandenburg Euthanasia Center were. The children were subjected to vacuum chambers to induce seizures, simulating high-altitude hypoxia. Arthur Rudolph was an engineer who oversaw the manufacturing of V-2 rockets, where tens of thousands of prisoners from the Mittelbau-Dora camp endured brutal conditions, starvation, exhaustion, and executions, resulting in an estimated 20,000 deaths. What better candidate than to place in Fort Bliss, Texas? Redstone Arsenal in Alabama and NASA at the George C. Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, until his retirement in 1969. He became a U.S. citizen in 1954, but left the country in 1984 after a Justice Department investigation into his Nazi-era activities led him to renounce his citizenship and return to Germany. Kurt Blohm was a Nazi biological warfare expert who was recruited despite involvement in human experiments on concentration camp prisoners. Kurt Blohm was a high-ranking Nazi biological warfare expert who served as Deputy Reich Health Leader and Plenipotentiary for Cancer Research in the Reich Research Council. He was deeply involved in Nazi human experimentation under the guise of scientific research involved in experiments with plague, typhus, malaria, and nerve agents such as sarin on concentration camp prisoners. Blohm did not relocate to the United States itself. He conducted his work in occupied Germany under U.S. oversight. Unlike scientists like Wernher von Braun or Arthur Rudolph, who were given permanent positions in the U.S., Blom's engagement was temporary and less formalized, so apparently he was conducting the biological warfare experiments in Germany. Blome admitted to experimenting with plague vaccines on concentration camp prisoners. These tests aimed to develop biological weapons and involved infecting subjects to assess vaccine efficacy. The experiments were conducted in camps like Auschwitz, where mortality rates were high due to the deliberate exposure to deadly pathogens. Blome faced trial at the Nuremberg doctors' trials of 1947, but he was acquitted of war crimes despite his admitted involvement in human experiments. His acquittal is widely attributed to U.S. interest in his biological warfare expertise. Numerous other Nazi scientists with expertise in medical and psychological fields were brought to the United States to conduct experiments. The CIA's MKUltra program, 1953 to 1973, which explored mind control and interrogation, drew on Nazi biological and chemical data. The United States government concealed the Nazi ties of these over 1,600 Nazis to gain public acceptance. During World War II, Nazi doctors and scientists conducted horrific medical experiments on prisoners, particularly in concentration camps such as Auschwitz, Dachau, and Ravensbrück. These experiments were often inhumane, unethical, and deadly, performed without consent on Jewish prisoners, Romani people, Soviet POWs, and other marginalized groups. At camps like Buchenwald and Auschwitz, diseases such as typhus, malaria, and tuberculosis were studied. Prisoners were deliberately infected and given experimental treatments. Most victims suffered extreme pain, permanent damage, or death. Sterilization and eugenics experiments were also conducted under the Nazi belief in racial purity and cleansing society of those deemed unfit to reproduce, including Jews, Romani people, and disabled individuals. Methods included forced sterilization through radiation exposure, chemical injections into reproductive organs, and surgical sterilizations without anesthesia. Thousands suffered permanent damage or death from these experiments. Twin experiments by Dr. Josef Mengele, known as the Angel of Death, were some of the most twisted. At Auschwitz, Mengele performed horrific experiments on twins. These included injecting chemicals into children's eyes to try to change their eye color, surgically conjoining twins to create artificial Siamese twins, and injecting diseases into one twin and killing them to compare to their sibling. Almost all twin victims died or were murdered for autopsies. Similar experiments began in the 50s in the United States. While no concrete documentation exists, MKUltra victim Kathy O'Brien alleged that Catholic facilities hosted MKUltra-style abuse or conditioning, often tied to trauma-based mind control. This is a thread that is prominent in my hidden past also. Poison and chemical weapons testing involved prisoners being forcibly exposed to mustard gas and other poisons to test antidotes. Many suffered horrific burns, lung damage, or death. Now let's look at how this matters to you. Have you always felt out of place or like a black sheep? Do you have large blocks of your life for which you have no memory? Most victims have few childhood memories as they were recruited as children. Were your parents associated with a military base or did you live near one? Did you attend a Catholic school? These were just a few clues. So that you understand how this could have happened to you, time manipulation, also known as time dilation, has been reported by many sources. Time dilation is a phenomenon in physics where time passes at different rates for observers depending on their relative speed or position in a gravitational field. This was described by Einstein in his famous theories of relativity. In special relativity, time slows for an object moving close to the speed of light relative to a stationary observer. For example, a being traveling near light speed might age 1 year while decades pass on Earth. Gravitational time dilation is when time runs slower as gravity becomes stronger. This is because objects warp space-time, and the deeper you are in that well, the slower your clock ticks relative to one in a weaker field. On Earth, the difference is allegedly on the order of nanoseconds per day and is only detectable with atomic clocks. In extreme cases, near a black hole or neutron star, where gravity is immensely strong, the effect becomes very pronounced. An hour near a black hole's event horizon might equate to years or even centuries for an observer far away. This is famously depicted in the movie Interstellar, which is grounded in real physics. If an off-world craft traveled at such speeds or operated in a higher dimensional space, an hour aboard such crafts might correspond to years passing on Earth. Also, while not currently confirmed, it is possible to create a macroscopic higher dimensional space using wormholes, aka Einstein-Rosen bridges, or negative energy, also known as exotic matter. So it is feasible that a person or a child could be missing for 15 minutes and be experiencing a year or more of experimentation. Next, let's look at the various programs and where they were conducted. If you were located in these areas, that may be a reason for further consideration. MKUltra was admittedly conducted from April 13, 1953 to 1973, when it was officially halted. Some sub-projects lingered into at least the early 1970s. The reach of MKUltra extended to a broad scope across the US and Canada, including over 150 sub-projects conducted in over 80 different institutions, including universities, hospitals, and prisons. CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, officially now known as the George Bush Center for Intelligence, served as the administrative and strategic hub for Project MKUltra. It was not a primary site for conducting experiments. Due to the secretive nature of Project MKUltra and the destruction of most records by CIA Director Richard Helms in 1973, a comprehensive list of all hospitals involved is not fully documented. However, based on declassified documents, congressional investigations, and surviving records, including 20,000 documents uncovered in 1977, several hospitals have been confirmed or strongly associated with MKUltra experiments. I'm going to give you a list of known hospitals where experiments occurred, with the caveat many more were likely involved. Here we go. Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, D.C. In 1955, the CIA funneled $375,000 through the Geschichte Fund for Medical Research to build the Gorman Building, intending it as a site for drug testing such as LSD and knockout drugs on human patients and volunteers. While planned, it's uncertain if experiments fully occurred here. Lexington Addiction Research Center in Lexington, Kentucky is a U.S. Public Health Service hospital and prison for drug addicts. This facility conducted LSD experiments in the 1950s under Dr. Harris Isbell. Prisoners were dosed with hallucinogens, often in exchange for their drug of choice, as part of MKUltra's drug testing phase. Vacaville State Prison Hospital in Vacaville, California. This psychiatric facility within the California prison system was involved in MKUltra experiments, including LSD administration and behavior modification studies on inmates, some unwitting, during the 1950s and 1960s. Ionia State Hospital in Ionia, Michigan is a state mental hospital where unwitting testing occurred on criminal sexual psychopaths, as noted by CIA Director Stansfield Turner in his 1977 testimony. Specifics are vague, but it's confirmed as an MKUltra site. Massachusetts Mental Health Center in Boston, Massachusetts is associated with Harvard University researchers. You will begin to learn that Harvard turned out many of our politicians and government experts. Harvard Psychiatric Hospital conducted LSD and hypnosis experiments funded by CIA front organizations in the 1950s, though staff were sometimes unaware of the CIA's role. New York State Psychiatric Institute in New York City is affiliated with Columbia University, another university that many elite come from. This hospital participated in early LSD studies under CIA funding, including tests on psychiatric patients, some of whom were not fully informed. Tulane University Hospital in New Orleans, Louisiana, is linked to Dr. Robert Heath's work on brain electrode implants and LSD, funded by CIA fronts in the 1950s and 1960s. This research was aimed at behavior control and mind alteration. St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. is a federal psychiatric hospital where some MKUltra-related drug and hypnosis experiments were conducted, leveraging its patient population for behavioral research. Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada, in affiliation with McGill University. This psychiatric hospital was the site of Sub-Project 68 Inches from 1957 to 1964, led by Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron. Experiments involved LSD, electroshock therapy, and psychic driving on unwitting patients, often causing severe psychological damage. Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal, Canada has been also linked to Cameron's work and CIA funding through the Allen Memorial Institute. Surviving victims have named it in lawsuits against the CIA and Canadian government. Specific sub-projects like Operation Midnight Climax is known to have occurred in San Francisco, California, but other locations are feasible. The operation. I'm going to provide you with a list of notable U.S. psychological and behavioral research programs, many of which emerged during the Cold War and focused on mind control, interrogation, and psychological warfare. Some of these programs were built on knowledge from Nazi scientists. Here's the list of programs that have been confirmed. Project Artichoke, August 20th, 1951 through April 13th, 1953. Primarily operated from CIA facilities in Washington, D.C. and Fort Detrick, Maryland, with U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratories. Experiments were also conducted in undisclosed locations, including overseas CIA black sites in countries such as Germany and Japan, though specifics are scarce. Project Bluebird. From 1950 to August 20th, 1951, when it was renamed as Artichoke. Experiments are tied to CIA offices in Washington, D.C. under the Office of Security. Field tests likely occurred in Germany and Japan, which are post-WWII occupation zones and likely focused on captured agents and defectors. Project Chatter. From 1947 to 1953, locations included U.S. Navy facilities, including the Naval Medical Research Institute in Bethesda, Maryland. Testing was done on naval personnel at bases such as San Diego, California. MK Naomi. From 1952 to 1970. The project was jointly run from Fort Detrick, Maryland, at the U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratories, with CIA oversight from Langley, Virginia. Some field testing was done possibly in Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland. Project MK Search. From 1964 to 1971. MK Search was a continuation of MKUltra, centered at CIA facilities in Langley, Virginia. Subprojects such as MK Often and MKC Hickwit involved Fort Detrick, Maryland, and universities like Pennsylvania State University for bird disease studies. Was this bird flu studies back then? Operation Midnight Climax. From 1954 to 1966, it was conducted at CIA safe houses in San Francisco, California. Addresses including 225 Chestnut Street, Mill Valley, California, and New York City, New York have been confirmed. Project Stargate. From 1978 to 1995. Conducted primarily at Fort Meade, Maryland, under Defense Intelligence Agency and Army oversight. Research was contracted to Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California. And Operation Dormouse. Started in the early 1970s. The exact start is unclear, but we know it was active during 1975 investigations. This was a CIA internal review effort based in Langley, Virginia, which was tied to post MKUltra damage control rather than field experiments. These programs were primarily CIA-led and explored techniques like hypnosis, LSD administration, sensory deprivation, and behavioral modification, often with ethical controversies paralleling Nazi-era experimentation. While exact, comprehensive records listing every individual destination for all 1,600-plus Nazi experts are not fully consolidated in a single public document due to the program's secretive nature and the dispersal across numerous agencies and contractors. Historical accounts provide key locations where significant groups or notable individuals were assigned. See if any of these locations ring a bell for you if you are searching for your memory. Fort Bliss, Texas was a primary initial relocation site for Nazi rocket scientists, particularly the von Braun Group, which consisted of 127 V-2 experts led by Werner von Braun. Arriving in September 1945, they worked as War Department special employees under the U.S. Army. White Sands Proving Grounds, New Mexico. Adjacent to Fort Bliss, this Army facility hosted V-2 rocket testing. Paperclip scientists, including von Braun's team, conducted launches and experiments here starting in 1946. Redstone Arsenal and Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. In 1950, von Braun and about 200 paperclip rocket experts moved to Redstone Arsenal, an Army base. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio is a major hub for the U.S. Air Force. It received numerous paperclip aeronautical engineers and scientists. The Air Force brought in the most Nazi experts overall. Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland was part of the Army Chemical Corps. This site hosted German chemical and biological weapons experts. Fort Strong, Massachusetts was an early entry point in September 1945, where the first group of 7 rocket scientists, including von Braun, arrived before moving to Fort Bliss. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland is another Army facility which employed paperclip experts in ballistics, explosives, and engineering, supporting broader weapons development. Naval Research Laboratory, Washington, D.C. The Navy relocated some paperclip scientists here for work on naval equipment, electronics, and propulsion systems. Fisher-Tropsch Plant in Louisiana, Missouri. The U.S. Bureau of Mines employed 7 German synthetic fuel scientists in 1946 at this government-run chemical plant. Langley Research Center in Virginia. Part of NACA, which later became NASA, this site hosted aeronautical engineers for aircraft design and wind tunnel testing, including some paperclip recruits. Muroc Army Airfield, later Edwards Air Force Base in California, is an Air Force site where German aviation experts tested jet and rocket-propelled aircraft, including those influencing the X-1 program. The Peenemünde U.S. pipeline existed at various Army sites. Other V-2 engineers were dispersed to smaller Army posts, such as Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, for electronics for missile guidance and control work. Additional locations included Fort Belvoir, Virginia, Fort Huachuca, Arizona, Fort Lee, Virginia, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and Camp Cook, California, which was renamed as Vandenberg Air Force Base. Fort Monmouth, New Jersey was a smaller Army Signal Corps post, which also hosted Peenemünde experts and unnamed physiologists from Luftwaffe programs, working on human-machine interfaces. Commerce Department facilities at various locations where Operation Paperclip experts worked under the Department of Commerce on industrial processes, though specific sites are less documented. It does appear that labs were scattered in New Jersey and New York. German patents were applied to U.S. industry at this location. Not all 1,600 experts went to a single site. The Air Force took the largest share, beyond Huntsville's 15 to 20%, followed by the Army, Navy, and civilian agencies like NASA and Commerce. Many worked in small groups or individually, making a full list exhaustive. Some were funneled to firms such as Reaction Motors in New Jersey and Aerojet in California under government contracts. So now we know that Operation Paperclip was not a few, but over 1,600 Nazi scientists who worked for the United States government after World War II. We know that numerous inhumane and non-consensual experiments were conducted on human beings, many at military installations. We also know that time manipulation is possible, and children or adults could feasibly be missing for minutes to evade suspicion. We also know there is the possibility that hospital staff, particularly at military hospitals, could have been involved. We also know that nuns and priests at Catholic schools were sometimes involved. So all of the people out there with little memory of periods of your life may have been victims of these brutal experiments. I know it's a little scary upon first awakening, especially if you entertain the idea of cross-species breeding. You will come to find a peace in that possibility and hopefully find out why you were chosen for such programs. If you were a study subject, you were likely chosen for a number of good qualities, including the highly intelligent, and you are likely being called to awaken during this long-awaited time in history. So don't let it scare you. We are still in charge of who we choose to become, regardless of our genetics, and we will work through it together. Please take a moment to share your experiences, though you may have very little memory of specific events. Look for the gaps. You are special and you are loved.